Hi, my name is Jordan. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with anger, clinical anxiety, and control. Welcome back to the Crosstalk Cafe, everyone. Before Chris and I step into today's lesson, we are incredibly excited to announce that our show is now officially sponsored by Strong Coffee Company.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I struggle with clinical anxiety, shame, and OCD. And Jordan, I am loving their mixes. They make an incredible instant coffee that's packed with grass-fed collagen, MCT oil, and L-theanine. For anyone dealing with anxiety, it gives you that sharp mental focus and clean energy without the crazy caffeine jitters that trip us up. Our listeners can head over to strongcoffeecompany.com and enter the promo code PCBC to get 20% off their entire purchase.
Yeah, it's seriously good stuff. Highly recommend checking them out. So moving right into what we are looking at today, we have a really fascinating lesson sitting on the table in front of us.
We really do.
It's an internal discussion framework, a curriculum guide right from our own community here. Specifically, this is the Celebrate Recovery curriculum that we utilize right here at the South Park community at Peters Creek Baptist Church.
Yeah, and, on the surface, someone might look at a local church's recovery curriculum and just assume, well, that only applies to a very specific, localized demographic.
Right, like it's just for certain people.
Exactly. But what we found as we spent time in this lesson is that the underlying architecture of this curriculum is just it's incredibly profound. We're going to be exploring how this framework maps out a psychological journey that really every single human being goes on.
Every single one of us, yeah.
Right. It's that journey from utilizing minor, seemingly harmless coping mechanisms to deal with stress, all the way to finding yourself in a state of absolute life-altering chaos.
Yeah, and the mission for our conversation today is really threefold. First, we're going to trace that terrifying escalation from small frictions to systemic collapse.
It really is terrifying when you map it out.
It is. And then second, we're going to look at how this curriculum completely redefines the concept of sanity. And trust me, it is a definition that will make you, the listener, completely rethink how you make your daily decisions.
Oh, absolutely. It's a total paradigm shift.
And finally, we will review the real-world community safety nets outlined in our summer schedule because, abstract theories require literal, physical community structures to actually work.
That is so true. And I think it's important to set the stage for you, the listener, right out of the gate here. This is a faith-based 12-step curriculum. It is firmly rooted in Christian theology and the Bible.
Yes, firmly rooted.
But as we look at this lesson objectively, we really need to acknowledge that the progression of what they call hurts, hang-ups, and habits is just universally applicable.
It really doesn't matter who you are.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't matter if you are actively working a 12-step recovery journey or if you're simply a professional trying to navigate a high-stress season at work or a parent dealing with overwhelming household dynamics. The way this lesson describes how human beings manage or completely fail to manage stress and trauma is just an absolute masterclass in human behavior.
Okay, so let's get right into the first major section of the lesson, which deals with what they call the subtle slide from small friction to systemic collapse.
The subtle slide, yeah.
The central premise here is that destructive behaviors rarely start out looking dangerous. I mean, when we picture someone whose life is falling apart, we tend to imagine these massive, catastrophic decisions.
Like an overnight explosion or something.
Exactly. But the lesson argues that chaos doesn't arrive with a warning label or flashing red lights.
Yeah.
It always begins as minor friction.
What's fascinating here is the focus on those micro decisions. The premise is that the slide toward chaos begins with tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in how we choose to handle our daily discomfort.
Which is so easy to ignore.
Right. The curriculum goes into great detail, mapping out 4 specific escalation pathways to illustrate how these micro decisions snowball. And these aren't just abstract ideas, they are deeply grounded real-world examples of how a coping mechanism morphs into a destructive force.
Let's walk through those pathways because they are incredibly eye-opening. The first one the lesson outlines is the path of control.
Oh, this is a big one.
It is. According to the lesson, a desire to control your environment usually starts with minor family arguments. It's the classic scenario,
Yeah.
Maybe someone is arguing over how the kitchen is cleaned or what time a spouse gets home from work.
Or how the weekend schedule is perfectly optimized.
Yes, exactly. Just wanting everything perfectly ordered.
And internally, what's happening in that initial stage is an attempt to manage anxiety by managing the external environment. When an individual feels completely out of control inside, maybe due to past trauma or workplace stress or just deep-seated insecurity, they naturally seek to assert dominance over the things they can actually touch and see.
So arguing about the dishwasher isn't really about the dishwasher at all.
Not at all. It is strictly about creating a predictable, safe microenvironment.
But the lesson outlines how this need for safety slowly suffocates the people around them. The curriculum states that these minor arguments about order escalate into deep, entrenched resentment.
Which builds up over time.
Yeah. And that resentment leads to marital separation, and the path ultimately ends in the total destruction of the family unit.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is just the ultimate tragic irony of the control pathway. The initial behavior, controlling the household, was deployed to keep the family safe and unified under that individual's vision.
But it does the exact opposite.
Exactly. The extreme application of that coping mechanism is what actually drives the family apart. The attempt to prevent abandonment essentially guarantees the abandonment.
That is a staggering realization. You think you're just trying to hold everything together, and before you know it, you're sitting in an empty house.
It's devastating.
It really is. Now, the second path the lesson points out is the path of anger. The curriculum notes that this often starts as just an occasional loss of temper.
Yeah.
We have all been there. You have a terrible day, you are drained, and you snap at your kids or you raise your voice at a partner.
Right, and society often gives us a pass for that early stage. We just call it blowing off steam or venting.
Like it's healthy or something.
Yeah, but the curriculum warns that anger is highly intoxicating. For someone who feels internally powerless or marginalized, a sudden burst of anger provides a massive, instantaneous feeling of authority.
People back down when you yell.
They do. The room gets quiet. And for a fleeting second, you're the most powerful person in the environment.
But the lesson is brutally clear about where this leads if it goes unchecked. It states that this occasional loss of temper degrades into a normalization of violence, escalating to structural daily beatings, and ends with the devastating removal of a child from the home.
This raises such an important question about desensitization. The body adapts to that feeling of anger, meaning it requires more extreme outbursts to achieve the same feeling of control or release.
So the boundary line of what is acceptable just keeps moving.
Exactly. First, it's just yelling. Then it's throwing an object. Then it's clapping someone's arm. Because the progression happens in such small increments, the person deploying the anger often fails to recognize that they have crossed the threshold into abuse until the authorities are literally knocking on their door.
It's chilling to think about that progression.
Yeah.
It really is. The third path the lesson highlights is body image and diet. And this one is particularly insidious because it often begins under the guise of health or discipline.
Oh, for sure.
The curriculum describes how something as simple as skipping meals for quick weight loss can escalate into severe clinical anorexia, eventually ending in lengthy hospital confinement.
This pathway perfectly illustrates how a coping mechanism can hijack our basic biological needs. Similar to the control pathway, manipulating food intake is often an attempt to exert absolute mastery over the physical form when a person's emotional or mental life feels chaotic.
It's another form of control.
Right. And at the beginning, the individual receives all this positive reinforcement from society. People compliment their discipline or their weight loss. That external validation strongly reinforces the coping mechanism.
The early stages are actually rewarded by the culture around us. But the lesson shows how that desire to drop a few pounds shifts into a life-threatening compulsion.
It takes over completely.
Yeah, the framework suggests that the person eventually loses the ability to perceive their own body accurately. The habit takes on a life of its own, dragging them from a state of perceived discipline into a state of literal starvation and hospital confinement.
Because the underlying hurt or hang-up was just never addressed. If the restriction of food is acting as a protective blanket over deep shame or trauma, no amount of weight loss will ever heal the root issue.
It's just a Band-Aid.
A dangerous one. Therefore, the coping mechanism has to become more and more extreme as the internal pain persists, ultimately bringing the individual to the brink of death.
And that brings us to the fourth path, which is perhaps the one most frequently discussed in mainstream culture, and that is the substance pathway.
Right.
The curriculum maps out how this typically begins with a single evening drink just to relax after a hard day.
And the operative phrase there is just to relax. It is utilizing a substance as an emotional regulator. In the beginning, it works perfectly. It numbs the stress, quiets the anxiety, and provides a temporary escape from the friction of the day.
But the lesson notes that emotional reliance builds up. That single evening drink compounds into alcoholism, And the curriculum states that this progression frequently ends in catastrophic legal and personal consequences.
Like what kind of consequences?
Well, specifically, it mentions things like jail time for drunk driving.
Which is just tragic.
It is. The shift from, I want this to take the edge off, to I absolutely need this in order to function, is a subtle shift in our fleshly desires. The mind and the body become completely hooked by the substance.
And what's crucial to understand about all four of these pathways, control, anger, diet, and substance, is that the people walking them rarely believe they are in danger until it is entirely too late.
Let's explore that blindness a bit. The way this curriculum describes the escalation of these habits, it makes me think of a tiny invisible leak in a massive concrete dam.
Oh, that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah, like when you first notice the leak, it doesn't look like a catastrophic flood. It just looks like a damp spot on the concrete, maybe a little trickle of water. It's so easy to ignore. You tell yourself, well, it's just a damp spot. The wall's thick. It's fine.
You justify it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what you don't see is the structural erosion happening deep beneath the surface. Day after day, drop by drop, the foundation is being hollowed out.
That is an excellent analogy because it really highlights the hidden nature of the destruction. The surface of the dam might look perfectly intact for years, even while the interior is just turning to mush.
But here's where I want to ask a difficult question that the lesson naturally provokes.
Yeah.
Why is it so incredibly hard for us to see the erosion when we are the ones caught in the cycle?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. When you are the ones skipping the meals or taking the extra drink or losing your temper with your family, why do you feel like you are still holding the dam together? Why does the mind actively lie to us about the danger we are in?
It's a profound question, and based on the framework we are studying, the answer lies in the immediate relief of the coping mechanism itself. Unmanaged anxiety, shame, and emotional pain are agonizing. They just demand immediate relief.
You just want the pain to stop.
Exactly. When you are drowning in those feelings, your focus narrows strictly to whatever will provide that immediate comfort. The flesh prioritizes short-term survival, which it interprets as emotional regulation over long-term consequences.
So the coping mechanism actually creates a massive blind spot in our judgment.
Yes, a total blind spot. The relief provided by the anger or the drink or the control is so intense and necessary in that moment that your mind essentially throws a tarp over the long-term reality.
You just can't see it.
You become completely blind to the real-world consequences because acknowledging those consequences would require you to surrender the very tool that is keeping you emotionally afloat.
This leads us to one of the most compelling and terrifying parts of the lesson. The curriculum highlights the extreme edge of this blindness by detailing a very specific, sobering case study. It's the narrative of a busy, successful career woman.
And I think it's highly intentional that the curriculum uses a successful career woman for this example. We have this societal stereotype that behavioral chaos only happens to people who are visibly struggling or marginalized, but this example just shatters that myth.
Completely shatters it. The lesson describes a woman who was highly functional in her professional life but had been through 3 divorces. She was dealing with an intense, unmanaged sense of loneliness and isolation. So, seeking connection, she turned to the internet.
And at first, the lesson notes, it was entirely innocent internet exchanges, just chatting in forums or messaging boards.
Which, again, is the damp spot on the dam. There is absolutely nothing inherently wrong with talking to people online.
No, of course not.
But for her, it wasn't just communication. It was an escalating coding mechanism to numb the pain of her divorces and loneliness.
The curriculum outlines the exact progression here. Those innocent exchanges turned into fantasizing about meeting these men. The fantasy provided a stronger pull than just the typing. Then she took the next step and began arranging public meetings at restaurants and coffee houses.
Now, up to this point, an outside observer might just say, well, that is just modern dating. She's getting back out there.
Right, it looked totally normal on the outside.
But the lesson focuses on her internal state. She wasn't making healthy, grounded choices. She was starving for validation. And here's where the unmanaged emotional pain completely overrides her judgment.
The lesson states that she began ignoring her safety boundaries entirely. The need for connection escalated to the point where she was agreeing to meet total strangers in their private cars and isolated apartments.
Think about the massive leap in logic required to make that choice. A successful, intelligent career woman knows the inherent dangers of getting into a stranger's car.
Everyone knows that.
Yeah. But her starvation for emotional validation completely overrode her fundamental human survival instinct. The coping mechanism took the wheel, and logic was entirely thrown out the window.
The climax of her story in the lesson is absolutely chilling. It states that she eventually found herself in a situation where she had to physically fight and escape from a stranger's car in a deserted, dark area of the city.
Cool.
In that terrifying, heart-pounding moment, the blind spot finally shattered. The lesson says she realized the absolute insanity of her choices. Her attempt to manage her loneliness had put her in a situation that had become a literal matter of life and death.
She recognized that she could have easily been kidnapped or murdered.
Yes. It is a devastating, crystal clear picture of what happens when a habit reaches terminal velocity. Her story perfectly encapsulates the core argument of this section of the curriculum. Destructive behaviors will always escalate until they threaten your very survival, whether that is the physical survival of your body or the survival of your family, your career, or your freedom.
So what does this all mean for the person listening right now? I mean, how does someone step back from that ledge? If our minds are actively lying to us and building these massive blind spots, how do you stop the slide before you find yourself trapped in a stranger's car or sitting in a jail cell or staring at divorce papers?
That transition from chaos to stability is exactly what the next major section of the lesson addresses. It explores the boundary line between what it calls insanity and sanity. And to understand how a person steps back from the ledge, the curriculum builds a logical bridge between its first two core principles.
Let's look at that bridge. The curriculum outlines Principle 1, which is fundamentally about admitting powerlessness. It requires the individual to admit that they cannot control their tendency to do the wrong thing and that their life has become entirely unmanageable.
It is the moment of absolute unconditional surrender.
And from a psychological standpoint, that surrender is the exact moment the blind spot is removed. You can no longer pretend the dam isn't breaking. You have to look at the rushing water and admit, I cannot fix this on my own. My best thinking got me into this disaster.
But Principle 1 alone just leaves you in despair. If you only admit you are powerless, you just sink.
You need a lifeline.
Exactly. That is where the lesson introduces Principle 2, which is where the lifeline is actually thrown. Principle 2 states that the individual must earnestly believe that God exists, that they matter to him, and that he has the power to help them recover.
Which leads directly into the actual framework of Step 2 in our curriculum. The language for Step 2 reads, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and where I know a lot of our listeners might feel some immediate friction.
Oh, for sure, the word sanity.
Yes, the word sanity. I have read a lot of literature on recovery, and I've heard from many people who push back hard against that specific word. Doesn't utilizing the word insanity risk alienating the very people the curriculum is trying to help?
Right. Doesn't it imply to the listener that they are somehow crazy or mentally defective or broken beyond repair?
It is a very common and valid concern. The stigma surrounding mental health terminology is massive. However, as we look closely at the lesson, the curriculum goes out of its way to define this specific word in a way that removes that stigma entirely.
How so?
Well, the lesson provides a very specific, non-clinical definition of insanity that completely reframes the conversation.
Right. The lesson defines insanity as doing the exact same broken behaviors over and over again, yet stubbornly expecting a completely different result each time.
That definition completely shifts the paradigm. It takes the concept of insanity out of the realm of clinical pathology and frames it as a mechanical failure in our decision-making process.
I love that framing of mechanical failure. It's not about being a bad person or a crazy person. It's like having a car with a broken steering column.
Oh.
You aren't evil for driving the car into a ditch if the steering wheel isn't connected to the tires.
Right, the car's just broken.
But you are exhibiting insanity if you keep getting back into that exact same car, turning the key, and expecting it to drive in a straight line.
Precisely. It is the stubbornness of denial. It is the belief that, if I just exert a little more willpower this time, the argument won't ruin my marriage.
Or if I just have one drink tonight, I won't wake up filled with regret.
Or if I just meet this one stranger from the internet, it will finally cure my loneliness. The curriculum identifies this as a broken feedback loop. The mind refuses to update its understanding based on the disastrous results of its previous actions.
So if that broken loop is the curriculum's definition of insanity, we then have to look at how the lesson defines the cure. How does the curriculum define sanity?
The lesson provides a deeply philosophical and highly active definition of biblical sanity. It defines sanity not just as normal, everyday functioning, or the absence of a crisis.
Then what is it?
It defines it as wholeness of mind, the trained capacity to make healthy life decisions based entirely on the truth.
Let's stop and really debate that definition for a moment, because as a daily anchor for mental health, that is incredibly profound. Wholeness of mind. Think about what it feels like to be caught in the cycle of a destructive habit. Your mind is deeply, painfully fragmented.
Absolutely. Anyone who has struggled with a deep hurt or a compulsive habit knows that fragmentation. Part of you desperately wants to heal and be free. Another part of you is terrified of the vulnerability required to heal, so it wants to hide.
And yet another part of you is screaming for the immediate relief of the habit itself.
You are completely at war with yourself.
So wholeness implies a total integration. It means bringing all of those fractured pieces of your heart and mind back into alignment. But the second half of the curriculum's definition is where the real daily challenge lies, the trained capacity to make healthy life decisions based entirely on the truth.
The operative word in that phrase is trained. I think this is a brilliant insight from the lesson. Sanity isn't portrayed as a magical state of enlightenment that suddenly falls on you from the sky. It is a capacity. It is a muscle. And like any muscle, it must be built through rigorous, repetitive practice.
And practicing making decisions based entirely on the truth is incredibly difficult, because as we established earlier with the blind spots, our emotional impulses lie to us constantly.
They really do. In the heat of a stressful moment, your shame will lie to you and tell you that you are worthless and that you need to isolate yourself from your loved ones.
Your anxiety will lie to you and tell you that if you don't control every aspect of your environment, your world will collapse.
Your addiction will lie to you and tell you that just one more time won't hurt. Those are incredibly powerful emotional poles, but they are not the truth.
That distinction is the crux of the entire curriculum. Sanity isn't just the absence of chaos. It is an active, militant reliance on truth over emotional impulse. When your emotions are screaming at you to fall back into your old destructive habits, sanity is the anchor that allows you to stand firm and say no.
No, the truth is that this habit destroys me.
The truth is that I am powerless over it. The truth is that I need external help.
Which brings us to the most critical, foundational part of this entire framework. If sanity requires making decisions based entirely on the truth, where does that ultimate truth come from? Who defines it?
And this is where we get into the third section of our discussion today, the internal work of the Creator, and moving from chaos to actual hope. The theological framework of the lesson explicitly identifies Jesus Christ as the sole higher power who provides that truth, who is the way, the life, and who provides the literal capability for human beings to change their nature.
As we analyze this, we can see how this theological concept serves as a massive pivot point for the individual in recovery. The curriculum states quite clearly that hope enters the equation the exact moment an individual stops staring at their own unmanageability and starts staring at the capacity of Christ.
Think about the mechanics of that pivot. When you dwell entirely on your own brokenness, when you spend all your time analyzing your failures, your relapses, the damage you've caused, you stay trapped in that frequency.
You become paralyzed by the sheer crushing weight of your own inadequacy.
Because staring at the problem does not provide the power to solve it. It's like a pilot in a tailspin, staring at the altimeter watching the numbers drop instead of pulling up on the yoke.
That's a great way to describe it.
When the lesson directs the individual to shift their focus to an external source of absolute unwavering strength, they begin to build the necessary momentum for recovery. In the context of this curriculum, Jesus isn't presented merely as an abstract philosophical concept or a historical figure.
Right. He is presented as the active, living agent of change within the human mind and heart.
The lesson brings this concept into sharp focus by utilizing a specific text from Scripture. It cites the book of Philippians, chapter 2, verse 13. I'll read the exact quote provided in the curriculum. It is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose.
That single sentence contains the entire operational theory of our recovery model.
But let me play devil's advocate here, because when people read a verse from Scripture like that, a very common misconception arises. Does this theological framework suggest that the person in recovery just sits back, folds their hands, and does absolutely nothing?
Like they're just waiting around?
Yeah, does it mean they are just a passive vessel waiting for God to magically fix their desires and remove their habits?
Not at all. And the curriculum is very careful to explain this dynamic as an active, living partnership. Notice the precise language used in the verse, God works in you to will and act. The framework does not suggest a higher power who sits up in the clouds and watches our struggle from a safe distance, waiting for us to get our act together.
It's an internal operation.
Exactly. The lesson suggests that God works inside the very will of the individual. He begins by changing the desires, giving the worn-out person the strength to actually want the right things again.
And then he empowers the actions.
According to the lesson, it is this divine intervention that restores order to the mind, helps the individual set realistic expectations for themselves, and slowly, painstakingly rebuilds their capacity to trust others.
It is a beautiful architecture for a partnership. The human being brings their willingness, their brokenness, and their admission of absolute powerlessness. And in return, the Creator brings the actual capability to execute change. It is the synthesis of human surrender and divine power.
And this synthesis is what finally breaks the cycle of insanity. You stop relying on your broken steering column, and you hand the keys over to the only one who can actually fix the engine.
But here's a reality check that the curriculum addresses very pragmatically as we look at the final section. All of this deep, profound, internal work we've been discussing, shifting away from insanity, clinging to objective truth, partnering with God, it cannot happen in a vacuum.
You cannot do this work in absolute isolation.
Human beings are social creatures. We require physical, tangible safety nets to reinforce our internal commitments.
Which brings us to the final portion of the lesson we are examining today, the actual time-sensitive operational updates for our South Park community. This section might read like a simple calendar of events, but as we look closely, we can see how these literal community gatherings are the physical manifestation of the psychological safety nets we just discussed.
Let's break down the major schedule. Change the lesson outlines for Friday, June 26th. The curriculum announces that the community is hosting our first annual CR picnic right on the church grounds, running from 5:00 p.m. to 7:00 p.m.
And they provide a very specific pricing structure for this event. Adults are $5, youth age 6 to 17 are $3, and children 5 and under are free.
But crucially, they establish a $25 family maximum limit.
Let's analyze why that specific detail is included in a recovery document. When people are recovering from the systemic collapse we talked about earlier, whether it's substance abuse or family separation, they are often in a state of severe financial ruin.
Money is often very tight.
By capping the cost at $25, the community ensures that large families or individuals struggling to make ends meet are not financially barred from participating in a crucial socialization event. It removes the barrier to entry for community support.
That is incredibly intentional. And the lesson lists the menu they are providing: hamburgers, hot dogs, sliced cheese, lettuce, tomato, onion, buns, pasta salad, baked beans, fruit salad, chips, and desserts.
Sounds amazing.
It does. Again, it sounds like a simple picnic, but psychologically, a shared meal is one of the most powerful grounding exercises a community can engage in.
Yeah.
It normalizes life for people whose lives have been anything but normal.
Absolutely. But what happens after the picnic is where the deepest community work occurs. The lesson notes that at 7:00 p.m., the entire group will move from the picnic area into the regular meeting room. We are hosting a special Women's Step Study completion ceremony.
This is a ceremony designed to celebrate the sisters in our community who have successfully finished the long, arduous journey through the curriculum steps.
Think about the importance of a completion ceremony. Recovery is often invisible work. It happens in the quiet moments when no one is watching, choosing not to drink, choosing not to yell, choosing to eat a healthy meal.
No one gives you an award for those daily choices.
Right. A public ceremony validates that invisible struggle. It provides a tangible milestone. It allows the community to bear witness to the transformation, which reinforces the new, healthy identity of the individuals completing the study.
Because this ceremony is such a significant event, the lesson outlines a major change for us. It notes that this is a major schedule change. We will not have Crosstalk Cafe that evening.
The community's entire focus and operational bandwidth will be devoted strictly to the picnic and the celebration of these women's hard work.
It highlights the prioritization of celebrating milestones over maintaining rigid routines when necessary. Now, moving into the following week, the lesson contains a critical holiday cancellation notice. Due to the 4th of July weekend, Peters Creek Baptist Church will not hold its regular Friday meeting on July 3rd.
The campus will be closed in observance of the holiday.
This is a highly vulnerable moment, and it connects directly back to our discussion about the invisible leak in the dam. Holidays are notoriously dangerous times for anyone dealing with hurts, hang-ups, and habits.
Why is that? Why are holidays so risky?
Because holidays disrupt our normal routines. They often involve complex, stressful family dynamics, travel anxiety, and societal pressure. to celebrate often with the very substances or behaviors a person is trying to avoid.
So the dam is under maximum pressure during a holiday weekend.
Exactly. The combination of disrupted routine and heightened stress can very easily trigger that subtle slide back into old coping mechanisms.
Recognizing that danger, the curriculum provides an immediate lifeline. The lesson states that if you need a meeting during the holiday week, our sister CR at Crossroads Ministries in Finleyville is hosting their regular weekly meeting on Monday, July 6th at 7:00 p.m.
This is the definition of a structural safety net. The community recognizes that a gap in the schedule could be life-threatening for someone teetering on the edge of a relapse, so they provide an explicit alternative location for continuity of care.
And the lesson goes even broader for those who might be traveling. It includes a general resource reminder pointing listeners to crlocator.com.
Which is such a great tool.
It really is. The lesson advises that anyone traveling out of town can use this site to type in their location and find a local family and a safe group wherever they happen to be. You are never geographically isolated from support if you choose to utilize the safety net.
Which perfectly rounds out the curriculum's approach. It addresses the internal blindness, it provides a theological framework from the Word of God for changing the mind, and it backs it all up with literal, physical rooms full of people ready to help.
Let's take a moment to synthesize the incredible journey we have been on today. We started by looking honestly at how small, seemingly insignificant habits and points of friction can snowball into life-threatening chaos.
Right. We saw how the desperate need for control can destroy a family, how the fleshly desire for anger can normalize horrific abuse, and how unmanaged shame and emotional starvation can blind a person to the point of risking their very life in a stranger's car.
From there, we examined the vital, necessary shift away from the insanity of repetitive, broken cycles. We explored the lesson's assertion that true sanity isn't just surviving a chaotic world.
It is a wholeness of mind, a trained capacity that is firmly grounded in objective truth and partnered with the power of God.
And we reviewed how that internal transformation is supported by the physical reality of a community sharing meals, celebrating milestones, and covering for one another during vulnerable holiday gaps.
As we wrap up our analysis of this lesson, I want to emphasize a key takeaway for you, the listener. Whether you are currently sitting in a formal recovery setting or you are simply trying to navigate the overwhelming stress of your daily life, auditing your small coping mechanisms is absolutely critical.
You have to be willing to look closely at the damp spots on the concrete. You have to catch the invisible erosion before the dam breaks.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to carry with you and mull over this week. We spent a lot of time today discussing the lesson's definition of sanity, the trained capacity to make decisions based entirely on the truth.
Yes, based entirely on the truth.
So take a hard look at your own life. How much of your current everyday routine is driven by actual objective truth? And how much of it is just a blind, automated loop of avoiding your own discomfort?
It is a question that requires immense courage to answer honestly.
It truly is. Thank you for joining us today as we explored these profound truths from Scripture and our curriculum. We'll be back next time to explore another fascinating lesson. Until then, keep seeking the truth and stay connected.